Natalie Foster, hi.
Hi there.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great.
Good. It's nice to see you. Thank you for joining me to talk about shifting power. Really appreciate it.
It's one of my favorite subjects, and it's lovely to be here. So thanks for having me.
I'm not surprised it's one of your favorite topics, which is one of the reasons why I asked you to do this. So, before we dive in, for those of you, the very few who don't know you, I should say Natalie has a long and distinguished, seriously, long and distinguished resume. I'll name a few highlights. Co-founder and CEO of Rebuild the Dream, which was, if I remember correctly, about kind of a digital platform for bottom-up, people-powered innovations, helping to think about ways to fix the U.S. economy. She's been a longtime senior fellow with the Aspen Institute Future of Work Initiative, and she's currently the president and co-founder of the Economic Security Project, and excitingly has a new book coming out called The Guarantee. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And Parker, I just got the very first copy that
Look at
they
that.
send you to make edits. So this is
We're
it.
breaking news here.
We're making news. Yeah. It comes out April 23rd. And it's really been such a labor of love. Actually, you just laid out my bio, and a big part of what I spent a bunch of time doing was reflecting on, the through lines of what Rebuild the Dream, which I did with Van Jones, circa 2011, 2012. So now, 10, 11, 12 years ago, what it is we were talking about then and what it is we at the Economic Security Project are talking about now and actually moving forward in the world, right? That has become policy, pilots in some cases, state level policy in other cases, and actually federal policy as well. So anyway, thank you for that. Another way of saying a long, distinguished CV is just saying I'm old. And that's true, as well.
Wise, wise. Before we get into it, tell me about the book. Like, what made you want to write it, and like the basic premise of the guarantee.
Yeah. Well, the guarantee is saying that in the age of AI, in the age of this great economic anxiety that is fueling the discontent in this electoral year, there's another way. There's another path forward, and that is to guarantee the good life so people can flourish in the richest country on earth, the United States of America. And I think if we were to do that in America, we would unleash entrepreneurialism, unleash creativity, and certainly unleash the space, the breathing room people need to thrive and live lives that they want. So I track I introduced the guarantee framework as an alternative to neoliberalism, the last 45 years of economic policy making, and say that we're actually on the path to a different way of policy making. And in the pandemic, we saw glimmers of so many guarantees. And so I track 7 of them and show how much they've moved from the margins to the mainstream across 3 presidential administrations, really led by activists who built the ideas up to the place where they could be picked up by a president like Joe Biden, and moved into policy over the last few years. So I look at family care, and how Aijin's work over the years. Aijin
Hi,
Pu,
Jim Poo. Yeah.
right, the head of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and visionary around care, had this vision, early on to make care a part of the American infrastructure and to guarantee care in America, and how that has gone from something that is simply your own problem to solve, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, to something that is, understood to be a societal concern, understood to be work that enables work. And in the pandemic, we saw glimmers of what that would look like. Same was true for the guarantee of college, the guarantee of good work, the guarantee of income, which is my life's work and our work at the Economic Security Project. So I honestly just felt like there was so much progress happening around me and inside of our own work within guaranteed income that I wanted to chronicle it. I wanted to tell the story. And so that is what prompted me to take a step back a couple of years ago, start writing, and get the book out.
That's so great. And I think part of what I hear you saying is that flourishing that you see is not only possible, but you see in those examples that you cite in the book. They're really examples also of power, of when you give people the tools, whether that's income, care, etc., it changes the power dynamic from this trickle down kind of approach of neoliberalism to the power's in your hands. So let's talk a little bit about that kind of power, and I'd like to sort of step back for a second and say, like, when did you first start to think about the role of power in how our society works and how the politics work in this country?
Yeah. I went to college at Pepperdine University, which is not a place known for its, progressive activism, let's say. But it was there that I personally really discovered community organizing and organizing as a craft and a way of thinking about the world. And I remember, in my earliest days, writing letters for Amnesty International, to release some political prisoner somewhere in the world, and realizing there was a power in witnessing, a power in shining a spotlight on an injustice that in some cases would result in the release of the political prisoner. And so that sort of was a first taste of, oh, this could really change things. And then I did an organizing fellowship, actually one that we share in common, Parker,
That's right.
called Green Corps. And in Green Corps, that training had a lot about power mapping, thinking about the map of power and who has it and how you can move it from, the media to elected officials to people in communities. Who has the power and how do we help move the world to a place where we, want it to be? And some books that were really influential in that was Walking with the Wind, which is John Lewis's memoir, where he talks about his many forays into power building for the young civil rights activists. And then, of course, moving from activist sitting in at the lunch counter and the power that the outside vanguard has to change those inside, to then becoming an elected official and understanding the inside power that lawmakers have to move things. And I found that to be a really helpful treatise on power.
It's such an interesting example. I'm so glad you raised it because, you know, John Lewis being one of those early civil rights leaders is really, I mean, maybe not the only one, but the most prominent one who over time made that transition that you just described, right? From activist, from agitator to an elected official, and how he continued on that journey to think about power and where it's held and his ability to wield it for justice. It's such a great example. I'm so glad you raised it.
Yeah,
Um,
and I had the great pleasure of living in Atlanta for some time, inside of his congressional district.
oh wow, I don't think I knew
Walking,
that.
yeah, a lot of my 20s were spent in that great city, and walking the streets that he and other civil rights activists walked, and just getting to see that living history today. So yeah, and look, I do think that his example is somewhat improbable, because I do think there really are different types of power and people get very good at them. And sometimes it's hard actually to move from, I think sometimes we see activists who then end up running for office, and then governing is hard. And conversely, elected officials who try and agitate outside and try and win public support on something that may not, already be there, and have a hard time doing that. So I think there's people who get very good at building and wielding types of power. It's very hard to switch. So it makes him even more exceptional.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. There's so few others who you can point to who've done that so effectively. It's great. So when you think about power today and the need to shift it, how do you think about the ways in which it needs to be shifted? Who does it need to be shifted away from? Who needs to be centered more? Uh, and just how do you think about that?
One thing I've been reflecting on a bit more lately is the power that ideas wield. How one's imagination, political imagination, allows for more power. I think about the role that Michael Tubbs played in opening up space and ultimately power for guaranteed income to move forward. So he's the former mayor of Stockton, one of the youngest mayors in America, elected at a very early age, I think like 24, and was the first mayor to run a demonstration of guaranteed income, which at the time was like a very sort of radical idea that I would argue had very little power in the world. It was an idea. And by breathing life into that idea, it expanded the imagination of what was possible. I think it opened up the surface area for more power building to happen to ultimately move it forward. And look, I think there is a direct line between what Mayor Tubbs was doing in Stockton, California, years before the pandemic. Mayors and other nonprofit leaders around the country who would pick up that idea and start demonstrating it in their city. Then Senator Harris ran for president on a very similar idea, right? Mayor Tubbs was giving $500 a month to families in Stockton with no strings attached. Then Senator Harris was running for president on an idea that would give $500 a month to families with no strings attached. And then the pandemic hit, and you have the Biden-Harris administration moving forward the child tax credit, which, if you have two children and you're on the lower income side of things, is ultimately $500 a month with no strings attached for families. There's a direct line there that moved an idea from the sort of margins to the mainstream at very rapid pace, building different powers to do so, changing names, right? Changing champions as it moved in to the mainstream and starting to gain more steam and more power. So I think, and all because a young mayor dared to dream.
I think it's a great example because part of what you're saying is the power of the idea is, in this example, right, is the power of possibility, right? It created a vision, a positive vision of what's possible. First at kind of an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, but then was taken up to be at a national level. And you see that playing out in such stark, contrasting ways today, right? One set of leaders working hard to paint that picture of possibility, and another, this dystopian future
Yeah.
that is based in fear and anger and retrenchment. And it is, to your point, it's kind of a war of ideas and a war of the vision of the future. And there's power built into that. That entire thing, right? It's about power and how it gets wielded and for whom and by whom.
Yeah, that's right. And it's always been a power, like there's always been such power in narrative and ideas and mythology and the way in discourse, right? The way we talk about things, the vision that we can forecast or the fear that we cast, often hearkening back to a time that is now ebbing away from us and creating great fear. And so I think that is a space that for a long time, one is who gets to dream, who gets space to dream and
Yeah.
to articulate big ideas, right, that could be taken up, is I think one of the challenges with thinking about the idea of power. One of the things I've been inspired by are the Black women who were organizing around welfare rights and the social safety net during the time of Dr. King. So I'm thinking specifically of Johnny Tillman, who ran the National Welfare Rights Organization and was really pushing Dr. King to take a stance on economic security, arguing it was a core part toward any civil rights or any racial justice, and really was big thinker on what a guaranteed income would mean, just sticking with that topic for a second. And it is part of why Dr. King ended up writing his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Community,
Yes.
Chaos, or Community, where he talks about what's needed to abolish poverty. And I just think of how important that is, right? To give people closest to the precarity, like Johnny was, space and time to dream, because what she dreamt and what she was pushing Dr. King on would change the course of America and
Yeah.
link two of the biggest fights of our time, racial justice and economic justice.
Yeah. That's such an excellent example. Are there other people or organizations today whose work you're particularly impressed by and think you're just doing a great job, particularly in this context of shifting power?
Yeah, one of the people that I was really honored to get to write about in the book is Adi Barkan, the late Adi Barkan, who started Be a Hero, and before that was a longtime campaigner. And the story of Adi is he was diagnosed with ALS after when his children were very young, his young wife, and dedicated the rest of his years to fighting for a healthcare guarantee, and did so in such a way that built power as he advocated, but used the extraordinary and tragic experience of dying, being a young, dying dad, to push for the healthcare guarantee. And I think of, during the primary of ideas of 2020, 2020. Yes. When you had so many different Democrats running across a whole variety of platforms. And he took the time to get every single one of them on the camera talking about what a healthcare guarantee would mean for America. The creativity it would unleash, the economic security it would unleash when people knew that their healthcare was guaranteed, and pushed people further to take stances that they hadn't previously taken. Built a PACs to be able to wield the power of money inside the election, and just the power of calling names and asking people to declare definitively where they stood, which they would then hold them accountable when they would govern. And I think moved the needle on a healthcare guarantee.
Do you have are there things that you've read recently or podcasts you've listened to or anything that's like, ooh, if people are interested in thinking about power differently, like here's something you ought to check out. You've already mentioned John Lewis's autobiography, and I just wonder if there's anything recent that's really grabbed your attention.
Well, I think that The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee is an extraordinary read. And I think there's it's a reflection on how important the story is for power. If we don't understand the history of why we live in a country with drained pools, as she talks about, then you can't fight for things to be better and understand how race and class are just inextricably linked. So I feel like that book is a definite must read. I think Alicia Garza's book, the Purpose of Power, is very much a meditation on this exact question. Thinking about the movement for Black lives coming out of the George Floyd moment, all the power that was built. Where does it go? How is it wielded? What is the purpose of building power? So those are two that come to mind.
I haven't read Alicia's book. I have read Heather's. I completely agree. It's moving. It takes, just as you said, history and connects the dots up to today so people understand how we got here in such a moving and powerful way. So thank you for raising both of those. Any last thoughts, Natalie? If there's one important thing that you want to leave me with, it could be something we've already talked about that you want to underscore. It could be something we didn't get to and you think is important to mention.
One more book that comes to mind is Mia Birdsong's How We Show Up. And
Love Mia.
I think this book is a reflection on power in a different sense. It's a reflection on the power that we have when we are in community, and the type of power we have when we're together. And that's a fundamental tenet of community organizing, certainly, right? There are two types of power is an early pedagogy I had. Two types of power. There's people and there's money. And you have to get people together to really counter the power of money. And what she's looking at is the power people have to author their own lives when they're in community, because of what it means to be connected to one another. So I think it's like an interesting entry point into any conversation about power, because sometimes, we live in a moment where everything is a singular, the power is often equated with a singular person, the sort of myth of the solo entrepreneur who went in their mother's basement and invented this thing that then would change the world. And in fact, in almost every case, there is a team of people who came together to do that. There were all kinds of, you know, built-in support to help that person get across the line. Or, somebody that power is in building a lot of equity in your Substack or on your social media, and it's how you call out on social, and that it still reinforces this sense of powerful individual. And I think what Mia's challenging, both with her work at Next River and in her book, is that actually the most important power, the lasting power, the staying power, the power that can win things is the power we have when we come together. And I think that old saying that, if you can go fast and go alone, or you can go slower, but you go together and you get across the finish line, is a really important one, and one that guides my work.
Well, that is a beautiful and powerful way to wrap this up. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you as a friend and as a leader in this work. So thank you, Natalie Foster. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, Parker. It's really, I can't wait to hear all of your reflections on power, having seen it wielded in so many different contexts across the course of your career. That will be a real gift to all of us.
Thank you. I promise I'll share it.